Let's get more on this now with Vicky Pryce, who joins us from London. She's an economist and board member at the Centre for Economics and Business Research. Welcome back to the program, Vicky. Firstly, the World Trade Organization for years was seen primarily as a tool for rich countries in order to further their interests. But with the election of Ngozi Okonjo-iweala in 2021 as the new head of the WTO, the first woman, the first African, there was a lot of hope that perhaps we would see a cultural change, that it would serve the interests of developing nations as well as richer nations. Do you share that same hope?
I do, actually. When you look at what happened at the ministerial conference, you just covered that. The fisheries decision, for example, which I think affects everybody, the decision on the patents to do with COVID, the decision also on keeping for quite some time to come the non-tariff imposition for any e-commerce that takes place. So in other words, you can also have quite a big advantage if you are a developing nation in terms of really using the technology, the IT that's really coming our way and which is revolutionizing the way in which countries are run. I think all these things are really positive, but the WTO knows full well that it needs to also reform and change and make sure that all the things it decides can happen quite quickly, as has just been suggested today in a speech by the head of the WTO. What we need to do is implement some of those agreements that have been made at the ministerial conference last month. It takes too long. Generally, the dispute mechanism, the dispute resolution mechanism hasn't been working very well either because, of course, Donald Trump had intervened and that was blocked for a while. So that needs to also start moving properly. So there is quite a lot that needs to be done to make it all more effective. And the issue about developing countries and why there was a general belief that perhaps the WTO was not democratic, it was because a lot of the decisions were done almost behind closed doors. There's a sort of famous green room where decisions were being taken, and there wasn't perhaps sufficient transparency. Now, if they can deal with that and can make a real sort of go of the new environment that's out there, which is quite positive for the WTO with the change of president also in the US, then I think we can look at it as making, hopefully, a good contribution to growth in the future.
And of course, we know world trade right now is in flux, still very much recovering from the effects of the pandemic, but we've also got the war in Ukraine, which is disrupting the supply of essential grains to large parts of Africa. We've also got really depleted supply chains at the moment because of the pandemic as well. Is this something that the WTO as a multilateral organization can address?
Yes, and indeed it's quite involved now with the World Food Programme. What the WTO seems to have agreed in the meeting last month was also something that is happening right now, interestingly, by the EU taking steps as well, was to make sure that food exports are not included in the sanctions regime that takes place right now, so that both Russia can both fund and then contribute to the food exports that the world needs. And as we know, there's an agreement now which looks Turkey has been very involved in setting it up, but it looks, at times, let's hope it holds. But this agreement in terms of bringing grain out of the Ukraine is being backed also by the EU certainly easing its sanctions on Russian banks so that they can fund the export, if you like, of food from Russia as well. So that's quite a change that's taking place. And I think the WTO is quite instrumental in contributing to all the other organizations that are out there to ensure that this food catastrophe that would happen otherwise doesn't happen.
Okay, Vicky Pryce, always good to get your expertise on the show. Thank you again for joining us.